Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hansen.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours. Today on Email After Hours, we're diving deep into one of the most critical and sometimes overlooked aspects of email marketing, and that is compliance. And of course, we're going to talk about deliverability too. If you have ever found yourself staring at your own inbox, wondering why your perfectly crafted email ended up in spam or worse on a block list, then you're going to love this episode.
Our guest today is Mickey Chandler, the founder of Spamtacular. What a name. A company that's become legendary in the email space for its expertise in email compliance and deliverability. He's worked with everyone, from your mom and pop shops to Fortune 500 companies, helping them keep on the right side of the laws, like GDPR, CAN-SPAM, and CASL. His insights are grounded in real-world experience and a deep understanding of what works and what doesn't. Welcome to the show, Mickey. It's such a pleasure to have you here on Email After Hours today with myself and Danielle.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And let's start with a little bit of fun. Guy alluded to it already, but Spamtacular, legendary name. I want to know what inspired it, because rumor has it Al Iverson encouraged you to go with that name. Is that true?
That's true. Spamtacular came about because I had a blog where I talked about pretty much everything. And some of my friends, including Al, said, I don't want to hear your thoughts on politics or recipes. I just want to read about email stuff. And I said, okay, I'll split that stuff off. What should I call it? And we thought about it. There was a little bit of brainstorming, but Al actually came up with Spamtacular. The first post that I have these days goes back to 2004, I think. But I think Spamtacular itself has been around since around 2009.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a long time you've been in the game. Tell us a little bit about how your business developed.
One of the things that you do over time is change. And sometimes change happens because you want it to. Sometimes change is thrust upon you. And so it all kind of depends on what sort of point you're looking at. I got laid off from a job last February, so it has been about a year since I got laid off. I've been doing consulting since then. That's one of those times when change is thrust upon you. And mainly I've been dealing with word of mouth referrals to bring in a little bit of business.
Well, hopefully today's conversation will send a bit your way. Let's jump into the sort of meat of what we're going to be discussing today. And, you were saying to us, you've been saying for years that the law should be the bedrock, not the ceiling. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
One of the things that I've noticed throughout my career is that people will come and they'll say, well, my program complies with the law. Especially when I'm running an abuse desk, you hear that a lot. Why do you want me to do this? Because my program complies with the law. Or to be more specific, what I would hear all the time was, we run a CAN-SPAM compliant program. My response, sort of tongue in cheek, is I had a CAN-SPAM compliant lunch. There's not a lot to CAN-SPAM. It doesn't require a whole lot, and just about anything complies with it. But the thing about it is, if you have a policy and the policy is follow the law, then why do you have a policy? That makes no sense. You follow the law. If you have a policy that goes beyond the law, well, then yes, the law provides sort of the bedrock of what you can do, but then the policy becomes the floor. But what you should really be driving toward are the best practices that people espouse. So, you want to be driving towards something that works for you rather than saying, I'm just doing the bare minimum to get by.
100%. And I think, the three of us, we all drink that Kool-Aid out of the same jug, that's for sure. But why do you think so many businesses do settle for bare minimum, when it comes to compliance? Is it laziness? Is it ignorance? Or, is it just plain old fear of change?
The people that I have seen over my career who are the most resistant to change are the ones who have been in marketing the longest. The people that I always noticed were the ones who really didn't want to change what they were doing, the ones who came to email marketing from like a direct mail background. So they did direct mail since the 1980s, and now they're coming into email and they're expecting email to work like direct mail used to. And with that, you could sort of say, well, this is what the law requires for the post office to take my message and put it in someone's mailbox. And you could get away with that. You can't really get away with that anymore, which means if you're not paying attention, you can get by at the bare minimum, and your mail may even probably will land in a folder somewhere, but you don't have any assurance that it's going to the inbox.
I bet they've had a tough couple of years, those people. Just with everything that's been going on, it's not a good time to be a curmudgeon for change. But actually that leads into the next topic, really, which is, I think we all here recognize that US privacy laws are really just a complex patchwork of state-specific regulations. And so, like, in your view, what led to this like sectoral approach?
When you come down to it, necessity is the mother of invention. And in the US, we tend not to look at privacy the same way that it is looked at, for instance, over in Europe. The result of that is Europe has taken really a human rights-based approach. That is to say, privacy is one of your fundamental human rights. In the US, we haven't really taken that position on things. The result of that is we tend to look at things and try to figure out how we can meld everything all together. The sectoral approach that we have happened because the people who want to meld it all together just weren't moving. And so something had to be done. So you have to take it in a sector-based approach and to some degree even devolve that down to the states, which creates its own problems because now you'll have states that have differing requirements, which means I can comply with the law in California or I can comply with the law in Florida. But how do you meet in the middle when those laws have different requirements that sometimes conflict directly with each other? That's a difficult question.
And I think we're already seeing that with like AI too, at least in the US with the states approach. But this patchwork as it exists, like, do you see that as sustainable in the long term, or is it more of a hindrance? So that's part A. And then B, do you think there will be a more unified federal law?
Eventually, Congress, I think, is going to act. Anytime you have a patchwork like we're seeing develop when it comes to privacy, when it comes to other things, eventually you're going to end up with something probably like can spam. Can spam came about because Congress looked at a developing patchwork across the states and said, we need one set of rules for the entire country. Eventually, I think that's going to happen with privacy legislation. The question is, when is that going to happen?
You know, so much talk at the moment about the artificial intelligence revolution. And, I guess in the same kind of vein, how long is it going to take us to see a meaningful set of laws to govern the use of AI then?
In the EU, we see that the EU is sort of moving full steam ahead with AI regulation. So, if you're asking about the US, I think that's sort of like privacy laws. Even the US Constitution has certain privacy rights that are considered to be contained within it. And I want to see those usually affirmed and not just upheld, but strengthened over time, which is why I do work in the privacy space, because I really believe in your right to be left alone.
Obviously, can spam, it's been around for a long time now. I think I can predict what your answer to this is going to be. Is it still fit for purpose? And if it's not, what kind of changes would you advocate for?
In my opinion, can spam wasn't really fit for purpose when it was passed. So That being the case, it's really easy to say it's not fit for purpose. But what Congress wanted to do when they passed it was say, these are the things that we absolutely don't want to allow. And to some degree, we have seen that purpose get met, at least in the US. A large part of the non-compliant messages that, at least that I see these days, originate outside of the US. Now, that's always tricky to enforce. It's difficult to go to China or Cambodia or Vietnam and say, we need for you to help us enforce our laws. We've historically had some relatively good, clean enforcement actions working with Western European countries and Canada. So is it fit for that purpose? From where I sit, I'm a permission first kind of guy. So when they passed Can Spam, it basically said, the joke has always been that the law, it's right there in the name, you can spam. It's not about putting spam in a can. It's about allowing it to happen, but within constraints.
That point you just made about consent is an interesting one, because in Europe, where I live, because of GDPR, marketing consent is based on the premise of opt-in rather than opt-out. And I'm curious to hear if you see a future stage where this is embraced in the US, not just in terms of law, but in terms of, marketing practitioners recognizing that perhaps that's a better way of building a high quality and engaged marketing audience.
Consent is only one of the allowable reasons for a company to process personal data. Another, of course, is legitimate interest. What a lot of companies will do is they'll say, well, we don't need consent. We've got a legitimate interest. But, did they actually check to see, did they do a DPIA in order to figure out whether or not they've actually got one, and whether or not their right to that overrides the rights of the people whose data they're processing. And the reason I say that is it's really easy just to get caught up in the idea that the US just doesn't know what's going on. The fact of the matter is I don't strictly need consent even in the EU, but by and large, consent is the way, it's the easiest thing to get.
What we learned is that when best practices are essentially codified into law, email marketing performance improves. At a very basic level, when we look at even inbox placement rates, like delivery rates, we see better performance when best practices are followed versus just when the law is followed. But when there is so much data to show that these best practices actually improve a program, how can marketers kind of justify not implementing them? Like, what makes them so uncomfortable with the change if it is good for their business and their email programs?
When I have had to deal with sort of those issues in enforcing not necessarily the law, but enforcing even the requirements of contracts, in saying to an ESP client, your contract says you have to get consent. The answer always has been, well, that's not the way we've ever done it before. So the real answer to your question is just stodginess. Well, we've never done it that way before, and we're uncomfortable with changing to do it that way. And I think that's a problem. I think you would agree that that's a problem.
and thus there will somehow always still be job opportunities.
Yeah, so, I was telling someone just the other day, I would love to be the person who works himself out of a job. But if there's one thing I've learned in doing this for 20 years, there will always be work. And what that means is, for me, I am not going to do this forever. At some point, I'm going to retire. I'm going to shut down my email client and never look at another email again. And, for me, that'll be a pretty good day. But spam will still be there. And we've got to start, teaching and training the young people who are going to come behind us and do this job after we're gone Because if there's one thing that we've noticed in the last 20 years is spammers are going to spam.
Absolutely, because they know how effective the channel is too. We are going to have to start wrapping up what's been a fascinating conversation today. And I want to sort of finish with a more future-focused question. If we look ahead, what do you think might be the next big shift in privacy laws or regulations, specifically for email marketers? Do you think there's another major change lurking on the horizon, or are we more likely to be in a holding pattern for now?
I think for now, as far as the law is concerned, we're probably in a holding pattern for at least another 5 years. That said, I think that the next big change that email marketers should be looking for is going to be an expansion of what we saw last year. I think that Yahoo and Google and Microsoft, I don't think that they're going to sit at allowing DMARC records to sit at p equals none with no reporting forever. I think the next big change that we're going to see in the industry is going to be saying, you need to be at p equals quarantine at least. And then, in another 10 years, maybe it's p equals reject. I don't know. But the way that those standards got set up when they were created last year was you just need p equals none. And how many DMARC records are out there that say p equals none, and there's not even any reporting? So it's just p equals none.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go, Danielle. You can lobby for p equals reject at Morg next week.
I was going to say, if you ask Marcel, 10 years it's not going to work for the p equals reject. That's going to be like next week.
Oh, absolutely. And on my blog, I've started telling people that if you're not looking for that change to come, then you're going to be really surprised when it happens, because p equals quarantine is absolutely going to be next. But
yeah,
p equals reject, I think, is coming. I think it's going to get here. How long it takes for that to happen, I think, is the only issue that's up for debate. So again, we've sort of touched on this a couple of times already. The industry is going to move well ahead of the law. And as long as we end up at a place where not too many people are complaining about getting spam to their to their legislators, and I almost said national, but in the EU, there's national and then also the EU. As long as people aren't complaining to their EU MPs or their national legislators, probably not going to see too much more national laws that are related to spam, which could be a good thing. Again, I don't think CAN-SPAM was fit for purpose when it was passed. And eventually that voice is going to get loud enough that they feel the need to do something. How long that's going to be, I don't know. I don't see that on the horizon here in the US. But the industry is definitely going to lead. And the reason for that is Gmail, Yahoo, and Microsoft care about what their users, the mailing list recipients, think and how they act, because ultimately what they're selling is ad access to those users. Anything that drives them away and anything that causes them to spend less time in the platform is a bad business decision for those groups. So they're going to push that envelope because it's good for their users. It's also, as a result, good for the industry. But until people sort of catch on to that, we're going to see that envelope get pushed a little at a time, because we've got to drag the marketers along, sort of kicking and screaming, to get them to understand that it's the end user, it's the mail recipient whose opinion really matters here.
Can I just say, whenever I'm at these MOGs or whenever I'm listening to Google and Yahoo talk about this, I find myself getting so radicalized by it. I'm like, yeah, do P equals reject right now and only strict alignment, and both DKIM and SPF have to pass. I just go off on a bit of a crazy tangent and come home being like, what just happened to me today?
Thanks so much for joining us today and sharing such a wealth of great insights and expertise with our audience. For our listeners, if you're interested in connecting with you or learning more about your work, what's the best way that they can reach out?
Well, let's see. I would tell people to reach out to Wizardries, WHIZARDRIES.com. That's where I do my consulting work. I also have a small law firm where I do legal consulting, but you can find the link to that on the Wizardries website. So go there or go to Spamtacular where I have links to both.
100%. That's great.
And Guy and I are always super proud of the guests who join us on Email After Hours, but we're always looking for new people to feature on future episodes too. So if you'd like to join us on an upcoming episode, drop us a comment or just ping us on LinkedIn or fill out the form in the show notes. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye for now. Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours, and see you next time.